almost impractical. You know, the guy, the president of the United States, pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment. You know, you get the House, Senate would be under tremendous pressure. President Trump has no need to do that. He didn't do anything wrong.
Thankfully, the president hasn't done anything wrong and wouldn't have any need for a pardon.
All right, let's talk about it with our panel. Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. Welcome to all of you.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so the president has tweeted a lot, as he always does, and he says, listen, I've been told by numerous legal scholars I have the absolute right to pardon myself, but why would I do that when I've done nothing wrong? Matt?
Yeah, this is basically all what they call the political question. You're the lawyer, I'm not. But the idea that we'd even be in a place where the president would be pardoning himself, and maybe it goes to the nation's highest court. I think what the president is really trying to say is that there are a lot of constitutional questions about everything that's happened in this whole controversy, including spying on the executive branch, spying on members of the opposing campaign. Lots of questions here. And he's saying, I'm going to fight fire with fire. You're doing things that I view as extra constitutional, including having a special counsel that's acting more like a Senate confirmed actor in the Department of Justice, and he's saying I'm going to fight it with the powers I have as well.
All right, I want to play a little bit of what Senator Ed Markey had to say about this. Here's his take.
It's not a rule of Trump. It's a rule of law that we live under in the United States of America. Even back in 1974, Richard Nixon's Justice Department made it quite clear that Nixon could not pardon himself. The same thing is true here.
Okay, and A.B., he's referring to a memo that was written by then Acting Assistant Attorney General Mary Lawton, who said under the fundamental rule that no one can be a judge in his own case, the president cannot pardon himself. 1974.
Right. Nixon hoped that it would be possible, but it wasn't. This is a really, remember, we're in the middle of a spin war, of a political campaign that Rudy Giuliani is waging in the press on behalf of Donald Trump at his request to spin things a certain way so as to form the opinions among Trump supporters and others and congressional Republicans who are supine and completely acquiescent at this point.
But they disagree on some of these points. They're
I
not in lockstep.
I don't hear anyone today fighting the pardon thing. Ted Cruz, as Guy and I were just discussing, went silent for 18 seconds when asked if it was constitutional for the president to fire himself. And he, having boasted that he memorized the Constitution, to pardon himself, I'm sorry.
Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham have pushed back.
They did not push back. They said, wow, if that was my lawyer, I'd get a new one.
Well, that sounds like a pushback.
It was not. We are here taking an oath to the Constitution and not the man. He is not allowed to do this. These are nearly dictatorial powers he's describing in that 20-page memo and in his tweets this morning, and that is out of line. No one pushed back that hard. They called it a distraction. Bob Corker wondered why he talks this way, which takes away from the subjects of the day. Shannon, let's get back to the fact that the Trump team completely lied about the Trump Tower meeting description that the president gave when he dictated a false statement. They know Bob Mueller has that. They know that Mark Corallo, who was on the Trump legal team, temporarily left because he believed a cover-up was in the hatching, and he has testified to Bob Mueller about that.
Okay,
they know Josh Rafael.
Let's stop and break some of this down.
And Hope Hicks
let's stop and break some of this down.
That was crafted.
Because this is one of the things that Rudy Giuliani said about why he doesn't want the president to testify, because he says if you remember things differently, if the accounts change, Guy, that creates a lot of problem, even if there is an innocent explanation for everything about who dictated the letter, what input the president had. It seems the story has changed, but Giuliani says, no, Jay got this wrong, but this is why I don't want them interviewing the president.
Well, the story has absolutely changed, and they said, no, it didn't happen, and now in the letter that they sent, I guess, in January, they admit that it did. That's not good. That hurts their credibility. There's no question about that. To me, as I look back and I'm looking at these clips and watching them from Rudy on the Sunday shows and the tweet from the president, sort of gaming out self-pardons, I'm sitting here thinking, what on earth are we doing here? Why are we listening to the president and his team speculate in real time about whether he might do something that they then hasten to add, oh, he'll never have to do it? To me, it's an obvious, that's a crazy hypothetical. It would never come to that. Next question, no comment. But instead, Trump doubles down and says, you bet I can do it, which is why we're all sitting here debating the finer points of whether or not the president could hypothetically get to that point. Why?
But Matt, again, he says there's no need for it. But
Right.
he wants to be on the record saying that I believe, because of what legal scholars have told me, I would be right to do this.
Yeah, I think there's a hinge here. There's a question about what are the president's limits of his pardon power. But there's also this whole question about whether a president can be indicted. And I think what the founders and the writers of our Constitution envisioned is that a politician, the head of our government, the President of the United States, chief executive, the best way to handle these questions is the impeachment process through the House and with conviction in the Senate. And all these questions about whether the president could be indicted, it hinges on this question of pardons, and it also hinges on this final question. This is really important. We have Bob Mueller acting much more like a Senate-confirmed officer of the Constitution and not like somebody who was picked to do a discrete task. And that's the real question here. Is Bob Mueller being managed? Is he able to pull people onto his team at his discretion? If that's the case, he should be confirmed by the Senate. That's a substantial constitutional question that we're not talking about.
All right, AB, you used the word dictatorial, which you know that's going to upset a lot of people when they talk about this. But the
I said
fact
nearly
is,
dictatorial.
Okay, nearly dictatorial. It's qualified. But the Constitution does have, as Matt talked about, this framework for impeachment. So if there are enough people convinced that this president is out of line, whether he's committed a crime or not, whether he's pardoned himself or not, they still have a means. He's not limitless in his power. There's still a way to rein him in if the lawmakers are convinced that's necessary.
But between the memo and his tweets, he's basically saying, I can terminate this at any time. I can't be indicted. I can pardon myself. He used the words absolute right. And he is presenting himself as above this investigation, let alone the laws that confine it. They are preparing, and we've talked about this at this table for months now. Rudy Giuliani is preparing a political campaign in order to basically saying he can't be indicted, he can only be impeached. But what they're doing with the reason I raised the Trump Tower meeting and the statement about it is because they know that Mueller perceives it to be an obstruction of justice, and it's likely to be presented in the report that way. So the letter from January with those assertions is designed to say, but you can't even really assess it as an obstruction of justice because he can't obstruct the law. And so what he's saying to congressional Republicans is you can't even impeach him for obstruction of justice. Because he can't obstruct justice.
Let me bring you into this because
impeachment's a political question.
That's exactly right.
But it's not like yesterday that people decided that there had to be a PR component to the political fights that they're waging here in D.C. That's as old as time.
Correct. And
that part of it.
I would also note that we're all sort of analyzing in granular detail the contents of this letter, this 20-page letter that went out in January. Almost that entire legal team is gone now. Mm-hmm. So you could argue that some of the assertions that they made in there are obsolete at this point, which is why I'm still baffled why Rudy and others would even indulge this conversation about self-pardons. That is a distraction right now. It's getting way ahead of anything, and yet they sort of threw that chum in the water, or at least responded to the bait from the press, and then Trump doubled down. I just don't think that does him much of a service here.
Well, we will see. There's an Inspector General report due out any day. We've got the Mueller investigation and many others, congressional bodies, and yet the president hasn't fired any of these folks yet. So we will see.